Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we dive deep into the stories that really need a closer look. And today we're tackling a tough one, the heartbreaking case of Kayleigh Haywood. Kayleigh was 15 when she was murdered back in 2015.
Yeah, it's a case that really underscores the just devastating consequences of online grooming, a threat that seems to be, unfortunately, growing.
And that's exactly why we're here, to peel back the layers of the headlines to really get into what happened. We'll be using the Wikipedia entry, Murder of Kayleigh Haywood, as our roadmap. It's a well-sourced summary of this really complex case. So Kayleigh, she was just a normal teenager, from Nisham, Leicestershire, young, just starting to figure things out, and probably, I'd say, not fully aware of the dangers that can hide online.
It's a sad truth, really, how many young people are out there vulnerable to these online predators. They're still figuring out, how to think critically, how to recognize those red flags, those signs of manipulation.
And in Kayleigh's case, it all started with these messages on Facebook. Seemed harmless on the surface.
The Wikipedia entry actually details, get this, over 2,600 messages. 2,643 to be exact, exchanged between Kayleigh and this 27-year-old Luke Harlow in just 2 weeks.
2,000. It's hard to wrap your head around that many messages.
Yeah.
It's just constant, drip, drip, drip of manipulation.
Exactly. This wasn't just, hey, how are you? This was calculated. It was Harlow building this artificial closeness, this sense of trust to make Kayleigh, more open to him.
And tragically, that's where it went. 2 weeks of this online back and forth, and Kayleigh agreed to meet Harlow at his house.
It's a common turning point in these grooming cases, unfortunately. The predator, they think they've established this connection and they try to move it offline to a place where they have more control over the situation.
And for Kayleigh, that meeting, it was a fatal mistake. Yeah. The Wikipedia entry says Harlow, he gave her alcohol and engaged in sexual contact with her. The manipulation, it just takes this dark, dark turn.
Oh, absolutely. Giving alcohol to a minor, it's illegal, for one, but it's also incredibly manipulative on its own. Predators use it to lower inhibitions, make their victims less likely to resist.
It's sickening to think someone would take advantage of a young girl like that.
And it gets worse. This is where Stephen Beedman comes in, Harlow's neighbor.
Harlow actually told Beedman, and I'm reading from the Wikipedia article here, he had a bird at his house talking about Kayleigh. It's chilling how he dehumanized her, treated her like some kind of prize.
It's telling, isn't it, that complete lack of respect for her as a person. That's what led to the horror that came next.
And it's hard to even talk about what happened next. After Harlow told Beedman about Kayleigh, Beedman raped and murdered her. The brutality. It's almost unimaginable.
It's a harsh truth, but violence is often part of these cases. Someone like Beedman, he might resort to anything, even the worst, to silence his victim, to cover his tracks. It's a terrifying reality.
It took 5 days to find Kayleigh's body. The Wikipedia entry, it says dental records were needed to identify her. And the cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head and face. It's just heartbreaking, doesn't even begin to describe it.
It's hard to hear, I know. But those details, they highlight how devastating this is, this whole world of online grooming. It's not just kids making bad choices online, it's predators actively targeting them, hurting them.
You're right. And as we move into how the justice system handled all of this, it's important to remember, behind the dates, the charges, there's a young life cut short. Kayleigh's story, it needs our attention, not just to understand, but to learn from it. Maybe we can stop something like this from happening again. So, from the tragedy, from how it even happened, let's look at how the justice system responded. It's in the legal stuff where we sometimes find a whole other side to the story.
It's crucial to really understand it. The details, they can be hard to share, but they often reveal so much about these crimes. In Kayleigh's case, there's one charge against Harlow that's particularly interesting.
Are you talking about the false imprisonment charge? I have to say, reading through the Wikipedia entry, that one, it didn't quite click for me at first.
Yeah, it might not sound as serious as the grooming or the sexual activity charges, but it actually tells us a lot about Harlow's need for control, his power over Kayleigh.
Okay, so break it down for me. False imprisonment, what does that even mean in this context?
It means Kayleigh was held against her will at some point, that her freedom was taken from her. That element of coercion, it shows this wasn't just, oh, she made a bad choice, She was manipulated, controlled.
Wow, that adds a whole other layer to it, a really disturbing one. Harlow's intentions, They went way beyond just meeting up with her. It was about power over her.
Exactly. That charge, along with the others, it paints this picture of him, how calculated he was being. Both he and Beedman, they were arrested quickly after Kayleigh disappeared. The Wikipedia entry goes into that. Beedman was charged with, well, with rape and murder, the worst of the worst.
And Harlow with the grooming, sexual activity, and the false imprisonment.
Right. And here's the thing, Beedman, he pled guilty to Kayleigh's murder. But Harlow, he went to trial. Admitted to the grooming, the sexual activity, but fought that false imprisonment charge.
It's hard to imagine pleading guilty to something so awful and still wanting to fight one of the charges. Why do you think that is?
It's their way, I think, of trying to downplay what they did, even when they're caught, you know? To hold on to some kind of control, even when they're facing the music.
So what happened at the trial?
Harlow, he was found guilty of false imprisonment, July 28th, 2016.
And the sentencing? What were the consequences for what they did?
Harlow got 12 years in prison.
I think a lot of people would hear that and think, 12 years, it doesn't feel like enough, not for taking a young girl's life.
Sentencing, it's complicated. It depends on so much. The specific charges, the laws where it happened, all sorts of factors. No amount of time can ever bring Kayleigh back, of course, but the sentences, they're supposed to reflect how serious the crime was. Beedman, he got a life sentence with a minimum of 35 years.
So not even eligible for parole until 2050 at the earliest.
Right. But there's something else. Beedman, he died in prison back in 2021.
It's strange to think about, Doesn't bring Kayleigh back, doesn't take away her family's pain. But he can't hurt anyone else either.
It's a lot to process, for sure. And it brings us to something so important about this case, the aftermath, what came after.
It's something we should talk about more, especially because, well, as tragic as Kayleigh's story is, it's also become a story about how we can stop this from happening to someone else.
That's right, it really has. After Kayleigh's murder, Leicestershire police, they took her story, and if you go back to that Wikipedia entry, you'll see they made a film, Kayleigh's Love Story.
Yeah, I've heard about it. It's being used to, educate kids, right?
Exactly.
Sure.
They show it to school children all over Leicestershire and Rutland to teach them about online grooming, the dangers. It's really something, taking this horrible thing and making it into a way to prevent it from happening again.
Taking that pain and turning it into action, into protecting others, that had to be a hard decision, but so important. It makes me think of, other documentaries out there, like Murder on the Internet, things like that. They all shine a light on this.
It's so crucial, those films and the work that law enforcement and these advocacy groups do, keeping this conversation going, because it can't just be a one-time thing, online safety. It has to be something we're always talking about.
And speaking of keeping the conversation going, you're the perfect person to ask. What can people actually do? Our listeners, they hear this and they think, okay, how do I protect myself? How do I protect my kids?
It starts with, honestly, just knowing what to look for, the warning signs. These groomers, they often have a pattern. The compliments, the gifts, all this attention, trying to isolate the person from their friends, their family. They might even try to make the person feel like they owe them something. It's all about control in the end.
Like you're saying, building that false sense of trust.
Right.
And making someone vulnerable.
Exactly. So knowing the signs, but then healthy boundaries online. Being careful about personal information, being careful about people who try to take the conversation off of, safe platforms. And maybe the most important, trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is.
Better safe than sorry.
100%. Don't wait for something to happen. Talk to your kids, the young people in your life. Really talk to them. Teach them how to spot this stuff, how to report it, and that they can come to you, to a teacher, to someone they trust, if something feels off.
And there are resources out there, right? For victims, for families, if they need help.
Absolutely. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they're a great resource. They have all sorts of information and support for anyone affected by online exploitation.
We'll make sure to put their website in the show notes for this episode. This has been, well, a tough one to go through, but an important one. Kayleigh's story, it's a reminder that online safety, it's on all of us.
I couldn't agree more. We all have a part to play in making the online world safer for everyone.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for this deep dive, for going on this journey with us. We'll leave you with Kayleigh's story, a story that really highlights how important it is to be careful, to be aware, and to talk to each other in this digital world we live in.